Hey, good morning, everybody. How are you doing? My name is Jared. If we haven't met, I hope to meet you maybe after the service or something. But we've been in this series called Haters. We've actually been talking about what it looks like to love haters. So I got a question for you to start thinking about right off the bat here. This question: what would Jesus say is the way to love haters? Like, even if you're not a follower of Jesus, if you just came with a friend for the first time here today, you kind of have an answer for this. We all kind of know kind of the general direction the answer to this question is going to take. Let me just walk through what kind of the generic answer is for this. Basically, we believe that Jesus loved everybody, and so we should love everybody. And so when haters come at us and we feel like there's conflict and these people who hate us, we're supposed to love them, and we're supposed to love them no matter what. And so when they start hurting us with their actions or their behaviors or talking behind our back, and when they do these things that hurt us, because Jesus hurt for us and because he died for us, the best thing we can do is just to take it and just kind of grin and bear it. And we're supposed to love them and through it all and just keep taking the pain, because that's what Jesus did for us. And so even though it hurts and it hurts us and continually it keeps hurting, we just keep hurting and we just keep trying to love and do the best we can with them. Well, I got another question for you. What if Jesus taught something different than that? So here's where we were last week. We actually started talking about the fact that haters affect our very emotional margin. And what I mean by that is that when you have a hater in your life, when you have conflict going on with somebody in your life, what you tend to do is you tend to lose productivity at work because you're thinking about this tension, this relationship broken here. Or you tend to get angry with other people in your life, or you tend to get frustrated, or maybe you're one of the people who just shuts completely down. You don't want anybody around, and that starts to affect how other people relate to you. And you kind of create this weird mode around you. And a lot of us respond in two different ways. When a hater comes at us, we either hate them back. You get that hateful text in the middle of the night, and you're like, oh, get ready for this one. How about try this one on? And you text back the hate that you want to give to them. And so you start this hating relationship, but you feel justified because they started it, and they were hating you, and now they're supposed to be hated. Or you may be the kind of person who starts hating on yourself. Like, you start to believe the hateful things that people say about you or do to you, and that starts to affect the way you view yourself. And so that affects your performance and kind of downgrades where you are. And so whether your response is hating others or hating yourself, either way, it's not healthy. So where we landed last week was really about this idea that if we believe we're the source of love, then we will love too little. Like, if we believe we have to figure out how to love the haters out of ourselves, if we have to figure out how to love somebody who's hating us, we won't do it. We will actually draw a boundary line where these people get into my love and these people need to stay out of my love. I can't love that person because of what they did or what they said. And so we said, basically, we were looking at a letter from one of Jesus' disciples named John. And John wrote this letter in the end of your New Testament, if you're looking in the Bible. He wrote a letter to this group of people, these believers, who was trying to help navigate how to handle haters, because they were being hated by the Roman government, who didn't like this group of Christians and people who called them the little Christ is what they call them. We can't have them messing everything up. They're causing a disruption. And the Jews, they didn't like the Christians because they felt like they were just taking people away from God, and so they were trying to kill them off. And so there's this huge conflict, and John writes this letter to them saying, no, you're not the source of love. The way you love your enemies is not because you are loving. Your love was too small. God's love is actually bigger than that. And so this verse is what we landed on last week. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. In other words, that if we can learn how to love even the people who hate us, if we can learn how to love one another, what we gain in return is that God lives in us, and God's love is made complete in us, that we will start to understand things about God's love that we've never understood before. And that's kind of where we landed last week, is that we got to figure out how do we love. And so I left you guys hanging last week, and today we're going to try to figure out how to practically do this. Now, I want to point you to a couple of resources that have helped me figure this out over the last several years. I've read these two books. One is Necessary Endings. Both of these books are by a guy named Dr. Henry Cloud, okay? So Dr. Henry Cloud, he's a Christian psychologist. He opened a very successful psychology clinic 20, 30 years ago, and he has since moved on from running that clinic to writing books, to writing resources, to becoming a consultant and a coach in the business world to help people navigate difficult relationships. And what I love about Necessary Endings, if you are a business person, if you are a leader or a manager, and you need to figure out how to figure out who to invest in and how to figure out these weird relational networks inside your work, this is the book for you. If you're looking for a book that will help you navigate family relationships or marriage relationships or relationship with your kids or just relationships with your friends in general, Boundaries is another one of his great books that helps set up some of the topics we're going to talk about. In fact, I've stolen some stuff straight from Dr. Cloud today that I want to share with you because it is so groundbreaking in us understanding what Jesus taught. Because I'm going to show you a passage in just a little bit. What Jesus taught looks different than often how we interpret what love looks like. And I want to help us change our mindsets around what love can look like inside these relationships where conflict starts to occur. So I want to help define something. The book Boundaries actually has a definition of what a boundary looks like. And I think boundaries, we would all agree, are really healthy things, especially when you think about this definition. Boundaries show me where I end and someone else begins, leading me to a sense of ownership. Now that helps me really good, because if you think about it, Dr. Cloud talks about the very simplest way he can talk about boundaries is your skin. Your skin is a boundary. It protects you from the elements. And that is a very necessary boundary to separate you from other people too, right? That's why we use the metaphor when we talk about somebody's getting under my skin. It's somebody who is frustrating us and crossing over and getting in our personal space or crossing a boundary where they're like, dude, you need to back off. You're kind of getting under my skin here. You've crossed a boundary, right? So a boundary, just like skin, it just prevents us from owning something that's not ours. It prevents us from going into somebody's arena where we're trying to own something that they should be owning. Think about a 2-year-old. Have you ever been around a 2-year-old? What's their favorite new word they start to learn? No. Somebody, yes, thank you. They learn the word no at 2 years old. It's like suddenly they realize there is a difference between who I am and who my parents are. Because up to that point, guess what? Mom and dad have provided everything for me. They have made all my decisions. They know when I need to eat. They know when I need to sleep. They have tried to make me sleep at times I don't want to sleep. And I have learned to say no, that actually, you know what? I don't need a nap right now. No, right? And you look at that and you go, as a parent, that's awful. But guess what? Don't you want your kids to grow up and create boundaries and own things they know? Now, they don't always say no right at 2 years old. That's why you're a parent. You help guide them to understand what no they should be using and when they should use it. But that is a good thing for people to own their own boundaries, to own who they are. This is mine and that is yours. And I'm not going to try and take that from you because that's yours. And I'm not going to try to control that because that's yours. But I don't want you to control that because that's mine either. Right? And so, listen, the most extreme boundaries we create in our culture are prisons. But aren't prisons healthy boundaries? Those are people who have stopped paying attention to the boundaries we set up in culture, like your skin and your doorway and your stuff, and they've broken through all of those other boundaries. And so what we've said is, hey, you can't respect people's boundaries. We're going to put boundaries in place you must stay behind because you are hurting too many people, right? And so boundaries end up looking like really, really good things when we think about it from that standpoint. And so what I want to do is share with you the 3 categories of people that Dr. Cloud says you need to help figure out where your boundaries are with 3 distinct categories. And he even says in his book, I don't like to categorize people. So the point of this is not so you can work through all the relationships in your life and try to put everybody in a category. That's not it. This is supposed to help you figure out, how do I set clear boundaries and healthy boundaries in all my relationships, especially with people who I'm having conflict with? So here's the first category of person. He says some people are wise. He said wise people will listen to your feedback. They will take ownership of what you're telling them. They will take ownership of their part in the whatever happened. They will own it. They will say, yep, that was my fault. I did that. They will avoid excuses. They're not going to be like, well, listen, I know you caught me on a bad day, and it was actually his fault. He did this, and so I did that, and so you got to realize it wasn't really me. Like, they don't make excuses for that. They own up to it, and then they start to make a change. They realize that to keep this boundary of love, to keep this relationship in good standing, they're willing to make some changes. They're willing to do something else different to keep from jumping inside your boundary, right? So here's the way I want to define this. Some of you have wise people in your life, and you have conflict with them, and so here's what you do with them. You actually deal with them by talking. The way you deal with wise people is you actually talk about the issue. So when you have a conflict, sitting down to talk about it will help with a wise person because you can come to terms and figure it out. You can have this conversation, right? But that doesn't always happen, does it? That's like dream world. Wise person responds and, oh man, that was good. He owned his part. I owned my part. Yeah, I did something wrong too. And now we're going to move forward. That doesn't happen. So the other type of person you may end up dealing with may be called foolish. I don't want to call them a fool, because they're not a fool, but we've all been foolish, right? I mean, you've done some foolish things, let's be honest. Your mom and dad told you not to do that this weekend, and you went ahead and did it anyway, and then it turned out the way they said, but you're not going to tell them that their advice was good, but you've done foolish things. And your spouse has been in the car gripping the door as you're driving and tailgating the guy that needs to learn a lesson on the highway at 85 miles an hour, right? And you've been that person, and they're going, you need to slow down, you need to slow down. No, this person needs to learn their lesson. You've been a fool before because you've made a foolish decision, right? So when you deal with a foolish person, Dr. Cloud says, you don't treat them like they're wise. You treat them where they are. Foolish people, you need to deal with by setting clear limits. These are the people they're not going to listen to your feedback. They're going to blame other people, and they're not going to make changes because they don't really know that they're really hurting. They don't really, this is the way I am. This is the way I am. I'm just going to be this way. So you have to figure out how to set limits with that person to continue loving them well. Because if you don't set limits, guess what you end up doing? Resentment, hatred, why won't they, blame, it's their fault, right? So to keep that from happening, to continue loving them, you set up limits, you set up boundaries, not boundaries on your love, but boundaries on their behaviors. And you try to figure out where that needs to land for both of you. And then the last category, which by the way, this category of evil, most of us in the room have never actually dealt with an evil person, although in your mind right now you're going, oh no, I know a few evil people. No, you don't. You know some really, really foolish people who keep being like really, really stubborn. But evil people are different. And this is why I want to define evil people different, because for the one or two of you in this room that are dealing with an evil person, listen, you need to know what you're looking for here. An evil person is unreasonable to the degree that they will not even hear your argument, that they will not even think that you are being hurt. They don't even recognize your pain in the situation. A fool's going to look at it and be like, man, I'm sorry you felt that way. I'm just not going to change. But an evil person is going to be like, that doesn't hurt. Or they may be so reasonable, they may be like, fine, get hurt. I don't care. They're going to show no remorse for the fact that you are hurting. They are patterns of hurt. This isn't just like a couple of times they've hurt you and maybe they're not responding. This is over and over and over again. They keep doing something that reaches out and reaches into those behavioral boundaries and it hurts you. And then they're trying to destroy you. With an evil person, Dr. Cloud says this, there's only one way to deal with them. You love an evil person by pulling back and getting help. That's the only way to show love to a person who is trying to destroy you. You may need to get legal counsel. You may need to get protection and security measures. You may need to do something to protect you and keep you from being brought into their evil because they do not care about where this relationship is going. And if you do, then you'll set up clear boundaries and get help because you can't do that alone. So that should give us a framework that fits almost perfectly with something that Jesus taught about how we should approach relationships that end up in conflict. And so for some of you, listen, this is going to be groundbreaking for you. This is going to help you figure out why a person you keep talking to doesn't respond the way you think they will, and why the more you do this, the more they do that. This is going to help break some of this. But Jesus teaches something. And it's recorded in the book of Matthew. Matthew was one of Jesus' other disciples, and he wrote this biography of Jesus' life, and Matthew writes this down. Let me show you the first verse where Jesus gives us a hint of how to approach these people. He says, if your brother or sister sins against you, go and point out their fault, just between the two of you. If they listen, you have won them over. Mistake number one, you know what we make? We start having conflict with somebody, you know what we do? Rather than going to that person in private, you know what we tend to do? We tend to do the very worst thing we can do. We gossip. We go behind their back. We start talking about what they did. We start drumming up support from our close friends and people that are working in the same environment. And we all look at that person and go, yeah, that person, that's the one, that was them. And guess what they did? And you start drumming up this whole drama behind the scenes. And guess what? It makes you feel so good having people who support you and know what's going on in your life. And I get that. But listen, Jesus says, no. Wait a minute. You have conflict with a person and you're not going to talk to them about it first? Behind the scenes, just the two of you, you go and point out their fault to them. You don't need to point it out to somebody else. That's not very helpful. That's not very loving. Would you want somebody to do that to you if you were causing problems? Here, what about this? What if the person who hurt you doesn't even know they hurt you? Wow, they don't know. I don't know how they don't know. They may not know. Here's what Jesus says. You assume when conflict begins that the other person is going to be wise about it. The first step you have to take in conflict is that you assume the other person is going to listen to your feedback. They are going to make a change, and they are going to own their behavior. They are going to have a clear idea about where their boundaries are and about what they stepped across, and you can show them, hey, man, I felt like you were stepping across this boundary, and you stepped into my area, and you did this, and that felt really weird. I didn't know how to handle that. And they're going, whoa, I'm sorry. I didn't. Because if they listen, right? If they listen to you, guess what? You have won them over. You don't have a conflict anymore. If you just go and start with a wise person and you talk about it, Jesus says, just talking to them may solve the issue. And some of you right now, you have conflict going on. You have conflict behind the scenes that nobody in your life knows about because you have been unwilling to talk to the person who's causing the conflict. And rather than address it, you just kind of stayed in the background. And that's not healthy. That's not loving. The loving thing to do would be to talk to them about it. Here's what Jesus says, though, about those people who will not listen, right? You go to them, he says, if they listen, right? But what about the people who don't listen? He says this, if they will not listen, take one or two others along so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Now, this is uncomfortable, right? But listen, here's what Jesus is saying. He's saying, when you have a conflict and you've gone to try to talk to this person and they haven't come back with, well, they just haven't come back with anything, and you don't seem to have made progress, you know what you got to do? You got to get 1 or 2 people. You got to come in and have them sit as mediators, not as people who are on your side. Hey, friends, this guy really hurt me, and we already talked it out, and I already did the thing, and I tried to, but seriously, we need to go tell him that he's wrong. Come on, let's go. It's not that. Oh, girl, you should have seen what she did last week. Y'all gonna come? Y'all gonna come? We gotta tell her. We gotta tell her about it. It is not that. This is 2 people who will help you figure out if you've overstepped a boundary. See, every matter may be established. Every matter. Did you do the right thing? Did you do something to step into their boundaries? Did some of your behavior kind of make this worse? Maybe you don't know. Maybe you don't see the fact that something you did caused some of this to happen and you had no idea. But 1 or 2 other people on the outside to sit down with you and mediate this conversation should help you figure out, hey, where is this boundary? Where is what I need to own and what this person needs to own? Where is it at? 1 or 2 people, here's what I think. Is that what you think? And by the way, Jesus knows that in this kind of situation, this kind of relationship and conflict, when one person is being foolish and not owning something, guess what? The most loving thing for you to do is to set a limit on them. Not a limit on your love. You don't stop loving them. You actually stop doing some things that allow them to keep doing the thing that hurts people. Because, by the way, if they're hurting you with that same behavior, they're probably hurting others with that behavior. And most people in that situation are going, well, just let it go, man. Just let it ride. I'm just going to let that ride. I don't want any part of that. I'll just step back and get away from that. And that's when we start to build up this sort of resentful attitude toward this other person. And we're like, look at all the people they're hurting. I ain't messing with that. But guess what? You could have actually been a solution. Maybe this person being foolish needs a limit. They need a boundary. They need to know that when they do this, this is what happens. See, some of you right now are feeling really uncomfortable because you're like me. You want to please people. And the best way you know to please people is to not to stir up any trouble. Not to confront anybody about, hey man, you really stepped over a limit there. What you're willing to do to please people is just continue getting hurt and stay in the middle and try to navigate all the hurt. But you'd rather do that than to step into this really tough conversation and set up a limit on somebody's behaviors. Because to you, that feels very unloving. I'm going to cause them pain. If I tell them if they do this again and this is going to happen and I set this limit, then that's going to hurt them, and I don't want to hurt them. And some of you are going like, I love hurting people. Boundaries are great. I like it. It feels good. It makes my life easier. I don't have to mess with it. And you are unwilling to set healthy consequences. You just want them to feel consequences. You just want them to know that they have been hurt and then they need to get hurt back. So you make these really, really hurtful things and you draw it out and you make it way, way overboard. Listen, that's not what Jesus is talking about here. In fact, let me give you a definition of what limits look like. Limits are just natural consequences. See, consequences make sure a person feels the appropriate pain that comes from their own unwise decisions. This is how we learn that we've hurt people, isn't it? We have consequences that happen. Hey, listen, I've lost trust in you. I told you something in confidence, and you spread that around, and I didn't want that told to everybody. That was just between you and me. So listen, there's just some things I'm not going to be able to share with you for a while. until we figure out what's going on here. I don't hate you for it. I don't not love you, but I've got to set a clear boundary. There's just some things I'm not going to share. Hey, there's some things that I'm just not going to do for you anymore. Because you asked me to help with that, and you told me it was going to take a couple hours, and for that whole couple hours, you were gone. So listen, I get it. I want to come help you, and I still want to love you, but here's the limit. I will work as long as you're there beside me. It's just a natural consequence of me helping you. Because the last time you left me with all the work, and I felt like I was all alone, and that's just not fair to me, and it's really not fair to you, because you should own some of this. Those are natural consequences. And the reason we don't like that is because we don't like natural consequences on us, do we? We know the pain of having to learn from our mistakes, but listen, that pain is a natural consequence to your sin. And when you sin and when you hurt someone, when you cross a behavioral boundary and you jump into somebody else's and you own something that's really not yours and you own that for them, you have crossed over and you have sinned. And with sin comes consequences. And those consequences are to drive you back to healthy relationships. But if nobody in your life ever feels that pain that they're supposed to feel and you keep taking it for them, then they don't learn what it looks like to be in a healthy relationship. So some of you have a roommate, or you have a sibling, or maybe you have a spouse who doesn't clean up after themselves. Like they literally leave everything lying around. Like you are always the one that cleans the dishes that are left over from dinner, and you're the one that always does all the laundry, and you're the one that does all the cleaning. And look, you may be fine with all that, and you may love that. But it gets to a point where you're doing so much you actually can't finish it all without feeling really resentful toward the other person who seems to be doing nothing. And rather than approaching with a healthy conversation, you know what you end up doing? You end up blowing up. Fine, I just won't do the dishes either. Fine, you clean and you blow up and you have this huge deal. And guess what? All this takes is setting some simple consequences. Listen, this is not about you controlling the person, because some of you are like, yeah, that's right. I'm going to go home. We're going to get a list together and they're going to do this and we're going to do this. No. This is about this. Listen, sit down and you look at this roommate, you look at this person and you say, hey, I love making sure we have an orderly environment. It's just part of me. And I know that maybe you may not feel that. You may not feel it the same way I do. That's fine. But listen, I actually can't keep up with all this stuff myself. I can't do it. And part of what I want you to do is I want you to own your stuff. Like, if your stuff's laying around, I'm probably not going to pick it up anymore. Because if I pick it up and put it in the laundry with all my stuff, then I'm cleaning your clothes and you don't have to worry about it. Listen, I don't have the time to do it all, so I'm just going to leave that on you. Is that good? Because that's your job. And I'm not going to be able to do all the house chores. I know we usually get it done Friday and the Saturdays we sit around, but listen, here's the deal. I'm not going to be out and go have fun and feel relaxed on Friday night because I'm not going to be able to get this done on Friday now. So just so you know, I'm not going to feel very relaxed when we go to dinner. So if you'll help me get this cleaned up, I'll feel much more relaxed at dinner tonight. It's natural consequences. Some of you have a team member at work who is not carrying his part of the load. Like every deadline, he's the last one to get his stuff together. Like he's coming right at the end, and it makes your team look so unprofessional. He's just not carrying his part of the responsibility of what we're supposed to be doing as a team. And everybody behind his back is going like, man, this dude, he's just not getting it. And nobody's talked to him about it. And maybe you should just sit down with him and go, hey, listen. Every deadline, we feel like you're lagging behind. No, it's no big deal. I always get it done good. No, listen, you're putting a lot of stress on the team. Here's what we need to do. We're going to start setting some limits. We're going to need you to finish by 50% of the way through the project. We're going to need you to finish 50% of your part. And that way we'll know and we'll feel better. And man, I'm telling you, you're actually losing trust with the team by not doing your stuff on time. And I'm just trying to help you earn the trust of the team by doing this. Some of you are dealing with an issue with a person in your household who is addicted to something. And you've excused it away because you've been looking at it and you're like, if I could just talk to them, if I could just get them to sit down and talk for a minute, I know I could convince them that their behavior and what they're doing and the way they're acting is just totally destroying the family. And if I could just talk to them more, and you know, listen, nagging doesn't actually help. Talking doesn't actually help in this situation. You know what that person needs? That person needs some limits. They need some natural consequences. They need to know that their actions, that you're getting stuck with the bills every week because they spent all their money on other stuff. Hey, you need to let them know that you're being stuck alone, handling what happened at that party with all these other people, and that you're wiping up their messes. They need to know those, and they need to carry the weight of that responsibility because they should have to own the consequences of their own actions. So listen, this is hard. This is difficult to love like this. It's really difficult to step into somebody's life and love them right where they are, because what you're asking for and what you're asking to do is something that's really, really difficult, because it goes against everything in you, because you want to run away from conflict and you want to run away from the person who's doing unhealthy things. And Jesus is saying, no, you got to go and talk to that person. And if they don't listen, you got to take a couple more and you got to go talk to them, and you got to set some limits, and every matter needs to be established so that you guys understand, because the thing to do is to do that so you can continue loving him. Even if there's these things, these boundaries, these behavior boundaries you set, it helps you love them. It helps them show what love looks like. So there's one other category I want to show you that Jesus actually addresses. He addresses this evil person. He says this: if they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. If you talk to them once by yourself, if you take a couple people that you're really trusted from your small group and you go talk to this person and they don't listen then, hey, you may have to come back and really take your whole small group. You may have to go get some leaders from the church. You may have to go get some people who are going to help address this person's really, really bad behavior that's hurting you. It's evil. It's just completely out of joint. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, if they won't even listen to the church, listen, you treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Listen, if you've got somebody in your life that will not listen to anybody, you can't stay in that relationship the way you are and continue getting hurt. Jesus says you go get help. You go get help from a lot of people. You can't do that on your own. You can't help that person change. The loving thing to do is not to stay there and get hurt. The loving thing is to go get help. And listen, you may need to get legal help for actually getting away from that person, but you also need, Jesus says, you also need some people on the spiritual, relational side to help you see and navigate your way through, so you don't build up resentment, unforgiveness, and hatred toward this person who you're trying to get away from. But instead, you figure out how to love them all the way through it. And you may have to treat them like a pagan or a tax collector. And listen, that sounds really, really harsh. And for those of you who are not followers of Jesus, just bear with me here for a second. What Jesus is trying to say is this: that when you go to a person like this who will not listen to anybody, you've got to realize and understand that they may not even believe or understand the foundations of love that you're working off of. See, because you understand God as a loving Father. You understand God as a loving Father who sent Jesus to sacrifice himself for you, and you understand that. But listen, a person who doesn't believe God doesn't start with that foundation. And so you may have to go into this conversation about separating and creating a very clear boundary between this person who's hurting you. And you have to be really clear, hey, I've got to set these boundaries because I believe love looks like this, and I know you don't understand that. So in order for me not to get hurt again, we have to separate this far. This is what the boundary now looks like. You've got to treat them like they don't even share values that you share. And you may have to treat them like a tax collector. Now, tax collectors in Jesus' day, if you'll recall, they were like a mediator between the Roman government who's collecting taxes and the Jewish people. The tax collector was hated. They didn't even have a category for how bad they hated tax collectors, because the tax collectors collected Roman taxes and added on whatever they wanted for themselves. And so listen, you may be dealing with a person who is so selfish, they don't care anything about you. They're like a tax collector. They're going to collect and collect and collect from you as much as they can, and they're out to get whatever they can from you. So you've got to understand, when you approach this situation, you may have to separate yourself so far that you're not close enough to be hurt by their selfishness because they're out to get you. Now, what's interesting about this is in all these situations, we come back to the same problem. It doesn't matter whether you're dealing with a wise person, a foolish person, or an evil person. The same problem is this: we're still called to love them. And what's so interesting about this, you know, the guy who wrote this story down, his name was Matthew. Remember I told you that? He was a disciple of Jesus. You know what he did for a living before Jesus called him to be a disciple? He was a tax collector. How would you feel about writing that down? You may have to treat them like pagans or tax collectors. Ouch, Jesus, that hurts. But here's the deal. We all feel the pain of these relationships. We all feel the pain of someone hating us. And here's the deal. The reason we believe we should just deny ourselves and kind of turn our backs on people and just kind of like hate them or hate ourselves, that's fine, I'll just deal with the pain like Jesus did, is because we are unwilling to actually face up to that's actually not what self-denial looks like. Let me show you what I think is it's just window dressing. Our self-denial is little more than window dressing on our desire to please people or control them. See, I think our motive in dealing with haters is so out of whack that we don't even know that our motives aren't loving. See, some of us in the room, we like the attention we get from people when we go talk to them about how this person is hurting us. We don't like getting hurt. Listen, you don't love getting hurt by people, but you know what you like? You like having this conflict on the backside because when you come and tell your friends about this conflict you're dealing with, you know what they do? Oh, man, you're so strong. I love the way you said that. Man, that was so loving of you to say that. And they just think you're being so selfless. And really, you know what you're doing? You're being selfish yourself. Because it looks like you're denying yourself, but really what you're doing is just making sure that everybody's happy. And you like feeling that way. Some of you are so driven by your guilt to do the right thing. Well, I'm supposed to love this person. They're hating me, but I'm supposed to love them. They're in my family even. I'm supposed to love them. And you build up this guilt complex about, I'm just supposed to serve. I'm just supposed to serve. And resentment builds up behind the scenes. And you don't really even like the people you're trying to serve and you're giving to. And you know what you do? You keep a tally behind the scenes. Well, I did this for them, and I did this for them, and look how I loved them last week. Boy, aren't I such an amazing person, and look how terrible they are. Well, at least I'm loving them. That's not love. That's you satisfying guilt. That's you satisfying some weird moral obligation you feel toward this person. That's not you loving them. And some of us are such controllers that you love manipulating the boundaries of behaviors on people because you know how to move people and tweak things. And you can get people to do things that help you out, and it looks like you're being selfless. It looks like you're giving up so much, but really what you're doing, you're just working the system and you're working everybody around you to make sure that your needs are taken care of. And man, you're so good at it. Everybody else around you thinks you're amazing. But in your heart, you know you're manipulating them. You know you're controlling them. None of that is loving. Here's the big issue. No matter which category you're in, here's what you have to deal with. You have to deal with this. Once you begin to love someone the way God loves them, you begin to want what's best for them. The only motive to go into a conversation with somebody who you're having conflict with is because you love them and you want what's best for them, not to get what you want. And too many times we are deluded by ourselves. We are just racked by our own stuff, our own problems, that we put our problems in place and we think that's being good, loving people, and it's not. We're not loving them to what's best for them. We're loving them so that we can say we're loving them and we can move on and we can feel better about ourselves. This is the hard thing about love. That you may have to step into a messy conflict situation with someone because you are, listen, if you're a follower of Jesus, because you are supposed to love everyone because God loves you. Now, if you're not a follower of Jesus, you can take this advice and just leave it this morning. You can just think about it. But if you're following Jesus, part of your call is to love one another. And you may have to step into a messy conversation with someone who you don't really want to talk to about it. And some of you have been treating wise people like foolish people so you don't have to mess with them. And you put up these false boundaries between you and them, and the whole while they're going, man, they're so judgmental. They won't even give me a chance. And some of you are treating foolish people like wise people. You keep talking to them and talking to them and talking to them, but the way to really deny yourself would be to step in and be like, I know this is going to be super uncomfortable, to require some consequences and limits on our behavior, but I've got to do it. And that would be denying yourself and stepping forward. And listen, you've got to do this. You've got to do this because, listen, Jesus did this for you. And see, you think Jesus was beaten, he was hurt, and he died. Listen, he didn't want to do that. He's not like was inviting, man, I hope I get beaten today. Boy, I hope I get to go to the cross. He prayed before he went to the cross, Father, if there's any other way to do this, please do this some other way so I don't have to go through this pain. He did it because it was the only way to get you what you needed. It was the only way to get you what was best for you. That's why he was willing to do it. So listen, you need to back up and go, what is really the best for this person? And yes, it will look uncomfortable. It may cause you discomfort. It may cause you to have to walk beside them through some consequences and some limits you've put on them and keep encouraging them and loving them in that. But that may be what you have to do. And by the way, It doesn't mean you excuse all their behaviors either. Jesus didn't excuse your behaviors. Jesus called sin, sin. He wouldn't have died if the consequences of your sin hadn't been so great to require it. See, Jesus gave his life up as a ransom for you. He paid the penalty of your sin so you didn't have to experience the ultimate consequence of death. But there's only one person who died for people's sins, and that was Jesus. If you're in a situation and you keep saying, I guess I just have to keep hurting for this person. Listen, you don't have to die for anybody's sins. Their sins have already been taken care of. What you need to do is to love them the best you know how for their best. And that may look a little bit different for every single different situation and conflict that you're in. There are some people that you need to have a conversation with this week. So that's my challenge for you this week. My challenge is this: with whom do you need to have a loving conversation? And by loving, I really mean loving. The person on the other side you may be in conflict with, but can you love them well as you talk about what the issue is, as you talk about what the boundaries need to be in their behaviors to keep them from hurting you? That could be a really hard conversation. It could be a hard conversation with your mother this week, because every time you go over to your mother's house, you have this passive-aggressive feel from her, and she always says something that makes you feel like inadequate as a parent, and you feel like you're doing it wrong. And listen, you may be that mom. You may be that mom, and you're watching your kid parent your grandchildren, and you're looking at it going, I just don't know. Was I not good enough? They're doing everything different than the way I did it. Was I not good enough to them? Do they not see that I tried to do my best? Do they not see that? And the only thing you know to do is just to be like, well, that's fine. Just do it your way. I'm sure it'll work. And you come off as totally judgmental. And both of you love one another. Have you had that conversation this week? Some of you teenagers, listen, you need to have a conversation with some of your friends. Because you've got some friends who you love and you want to be with, and they are fun to be around, but they have taken you to places and you have done things with them that you know are not healthy, and they keep taking you there. And guess what you need to do? You need to set a limit. You need to have a real frank conversation and say, listen, I love you and I want to be your friend, but I am not going there with you again, because the last time we went, this is what happens, and I'm not going to be there again. That may be the first time anybody has ever looked at that person and told them how their behavior has affected somebody else. Listen, you may be a manager and you don't want to address the conflict in the team at all. You don't want to have the weird conversation. You don't want to address it, but you need to. Because you could step into a mess and provide clarity for everybody on the team. And if they listen, you've won them over. This is a big challenge for you. I know it's huge. It's huge in my life. But this is the way we continue to love people. And we love them well, even when they hate us. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much that you gave your Son to provide the ultimate payment for our consequences of our sin, that Jesus took care of death for us, and our sins are no longer counted against us. But God, in this life, we sometimes make really unwise decisions with our relationships, and we hurt people. God, help us to be wise people this week, to own our stuff, to own our faults, to own our crossing of boundaries that should not be crossed, when we try to control people and we just try to please people. And God, help us as we approach these conversations. Help me, God, as I approach these conversations this week, that I will be loving no matter what to this person across and want what's best for them. And move away my guilt, and move away my pity party, and move away my anger, and move all that stuff to the side so that I can just focus on what's good for this other person and help them get to what's best. And God, we ask that so that our relationships are better, and we ultimately ask that so as we love people, they will see that Jesus loves them. In your Son's name I pray it. Amen.